The last photo Cora and Dean took shows them smiling, relaxed by the muddy banks of the Oakhaven River. For Cora's father, Alistair, that image became a haunting artifact after a frantic call from the sheriff's department. The couple's car was still in the parking lot, their phones were powered off, and the only trace of them was a single muddy dress and a pair of shoes left neatly at the water's edge, a scene staged to look like a tragic accident. This story is a reminder that sometimes the most obvious explanation is the one furthest from the truth. If you've ever had a gut feeling that saved you from a bad situation, I'd be interested to hear about it in the comments below. Alistair sat in the hard plastic chair of the Oakhaven Sheriff's Department, a place that felt alien to him from this side of the desk. For 30 years, he had been the one behind that desk, the one offering grim but steady comfort to families caught in the worst moments of their lives. Now the badge was on another man's chest, and the grief was his own. Sheriff Thompson, a man Alistair had trained as a rookie, paced in front of him, explaining the situation in careful, procedural tones that grated on Alistair's raw nerves. "We've got the dive team in the water, Alistair," Thompson said, avoiding his old boss's gaze. "The current is strong this time of year. The most likely scenario is that they went in for a swim to cool off, got into trouble, and were pulled under." He gestured to a small evidence bag on the desk. Inside was a muddy, olive green dress. Cora's dress. Found this and her shoes right on the bank. It all points to a tragic accident. Alistair stared at the bag. An accident. The words felt hollow, wrong. Cora was a strong swimmer, but Dean was clumsy in the water and respected it enough to stay out of it. And the dress, left so neatly with the shoes, it felt like a stage piece, something placed deliberately for an audience. It was too clean, too simple. In his 30 years, Alistair had learned that human tragedy was rarely neat. It was messy, chaotic, and it left jagged edges. This scene had none. "What about their phones?" Alistair asked, his voice a low gravel. "Both powered off. Last ping was from the cell tower near the park entrance around 2 p.m. yesterday. Nothing since." Thompson sighed, finally looking at him. "I know this is hard. We're doing everything we can. We'll find them." Alistair just nodded, the helplessness of physical weight in his chest. He was a father, not a sheriff, and the instincts of both were screaming that something was terribly wrong. He drove home in a fog, the procedural calm of the station replaced by the screaming silence of his empty house. He and his late wife had raised Cora here. Her laughter was in the walls, her scuffed-up sneakers were probably still by the back door. The thought of her being gone, swallowed by a muddy river, was unbearable. The next morning the call came. It wasn't the call he was dreading, the one about a body. It was Thompson again, his voice holding a different note this time, one of mild curiosity. "Alistair, we managed to get into Cora's cloud account. The tech guys pulled the last photo she took before her phone was shut off. I'm sending it to you. It's not much, but it's a timeline." Alistair's phone buzzed. He opened the image, and his breath caught. It was a selfie. Cora was in the foreground, her face bright and smiling, a smear of mud on her cheek. In the background, Dean was mid-bite into a bag of chips, looking completely at ease. They were happy. They were alive. His eyes scanned the rest of the photo, taking in the familiar scenery of the Oakhaven River bank. Then he saw it. Further back, sitting on a fallen log half hidden by the trees, was another figure. A man. Just watching them. He was too far away to make out his features clearly, but his presence was a cold knot in Alistair's stomach. The dive team could search the river for 100 years. Alistair knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, the answer wasn't in the water. It was on the land. And it started with the man on the log. While the sheriff's department focused on a recovery mission, Alistair began his own investigation. His new goal was clear. Find out who that man was. He drove back to the park, the place where his daughter had last been seen. The yellow police tape was still up, a flimsy barrier against his personal nightmare. The official search was further downstream now, the deputies and volunteers having already combed this area. But they were looking for bodies. Alistair was looking for clues. He ducked under the tape and walked to the spot where the dress had been found. He crouched down, his old instincts kicking in, his eyes scanning the muddy ground. He saw the overlapping footprints of the search team, the deputies, the paramedics. But underneath it all, he found what he was looking for. Faint, but unmistakable. 2 sets of tracks. One set belonged to a man, a heavy tread from a work boot. The other was smaller, barefoot. And they weren't leading toward the river. They were leading away from it, into the dense woods that bordered the park. He followed them for 50 yards until they disappeared into the thick undergrowth and fallen leaves, impossible for an amateur to track. But the direction was clear. North, towards the undeveloped wilderness of the North Ridge. With the photograph on his phone and the direction of the tracks in his mind, Alistair drove to the park's ranger station. An old friend, Silas, was on duty, a man whose face was as weathered as the park maps on the wall. Alistair didn't bother with small talk. He pushed his phone across the counter. "Silas, I need you to look at this photo. The man on the log. Do you recognize him?" Silas squinted, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his shirt pocket. He stared at the image for a long time. "Hard to say for sure from this distance," and he mumbled. "But it looks a lot like Jedediah Croft. We just call him Jed." "Who is he?" Alistair pressed. "Local fella. Lives off-grid somewhere up on the North Ridge. Been there for years. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's territorial. We get complaints every now and then. Hikers wander too close to his area, and he comes out yelling, chases them off. Never been violent, far as we know. Just doesn't like people on what he considers his land." North Ridge, the same direction the tracks were heading. It wasn't a coincidence. "Do you have an address for him?" Alistair asked. Silas chuckled without humor. "Jed doesn't have an address. He's got a piece of land his grandfather left him, but the cabin he lives in isn't on any map. It's miles from any road." Alistair thanked him and walked out, the pieces clicking into place. A territorial recluse, a couple having a picnic on what he might see as his riverbank. A staged scene of a drowning. It was a terrifyingly logical picture. He called Sheriff Thompson immediately, relaying everything, the tracks, the conversation with Silas, the name Jedediah Croft. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Jed Croft?" Thompson said, skepticism heavy in his voice. "Alistair, we know about him. His file is a half-inch thick with trespassing complaints he's made against others, and a few the other way around. He's a crank, but there's nothing here to suggest he's a kidnapper, let alone a killer." "The tracks lead from the river straight towards his territory," Alistair insisted. "You have to send a team up there." "I can't divert the dive team and the ground search based on a blurry photo and the word of a local crank, Alistair. You know the protocol. The evidence points to the river. We have to follow the evidence." There was a hint of pity in his voice that made Alistair's blood boil. "Look, I know you're grieving. You want someone to blame. It's natural. But right now, we have to treat this as an accidental drowning." The call ended and Alistair stood by his truck, feeling a profound sense of isolation. Thompson wasn't his subordinate anymore. He was the sheriff, and he was following the book. But the book was wrong. The official investigation was heading in the wrong direction, and with every hour that passed, Cora and Dean were in greater danger. He looked up at the imposing silhouette of the North Ridge against the sky. If the law wouldn't go up there, he would. He went home and began to pack, not as a grieving father, but as the sheriff he used to be. He pulled out his old hiking gear, sturdy boots, a compass, and his topographic map of the county. From the locked safe in his closet, he took his hunting rifle and a box of cartridges. He called Thompson one more time. "I'm heading up to the North Ridge to do some hiking," he said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Just need to clear my head." "Be safe, Alistair," Thompson replied, oblivious. "Don't do anything reckless." But Alistair knew that recklessness was no longer an option. It was a necessity. His daughter's life depended on it. The hike into the North Ridge was grueling. There were no manicured trails here, only game paths and the dense, unforgiving wilderness. Alistair moved with a purpose he hadn't felt in years, his body remembering the rhythm of the hunt. He wasn't just searching, he was tracking. He looked for broken twigs, unnaturally disturbed soil, anything that indicated a person had passed through recently. For hours, he found nothing but the signs of deer and wild boar. The forest was silent, indifferent. Doubt began to creep in. Was Thompson right? Was he just a desperate old man chasing a ghost in a photograph? He stopped to rest by a stream, pulling out his map. He was deep in the area Silas had described as Jed's territory. If there was a cabin, it would be near a water source and likely in a location that was easily defensible, with a clear view of any approach. He scanned the topographic lines, looking for a small plateau or a hidden valley. He found a promising spot, a flat area nestled between two steep inclines about 2 miles further north. It was his best and only bet. He pushed on, the terrain growing steeper. As he navigated a thicket of mountain laurel, he saw it. A piece of bright orange twine tied to a low-hanging branch. It was out of place, clearly man-made. A marker. Hope, fierce and sharp, surged through him. He moved forward, his senses on high alert. 100 yards later, he found another piece. Someone was marking a path they didn't want anyone else to find. He followed the markers for what felt like an eternity, moving slowly, silently. Then, through the trees, he saw it. A small cabin, so crudely built and covered in brush that it seemed to be part of the landscape itself. It was a dark, ugly structure, a wound in the side of the mountain. A thin wisp of smoke curled from a rusty stovepipe in the roof. Someone was home. Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. He unslung his rifle, the cold weight of the steel a grim comfort. He crept forward using the trees for cover until he was at the edge of the small clearing. There was one dirty window on the side of the cabin facing him. He raised his binoculars, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He focused on the grimy pane of glass, and then he saw them. Cora and Dean. They were tied to wooden chairs, their faces pale with terror. Standing over them was a tall, gaunt man with a wild beard and burning eyes, Jedediah Croft. He was holding a knife, gesturing with it as he spoke, his voice an inaudible, angry murmur through the thick walls. Alistair lowered the binoculars, his mind racing. There was no cell service this deep in the woods. No backup was coming. It was just him. He was 62 years old, a decade past his prime, and he was up against a younger, stronger man who was armed and unhinged. He could wait, try to find a better opportunity, but one look at the fear in his daughter's eyes told him he didn't have time. He formulated a desperate plan. He circled around to the back of the cabin, moving as quietly as a shadow. He found a pile of firewood stacked against the wall. He picked up a heavy, fist-sized rock. Taking a deep breath, he hurled it with all his might against the far side of the cabin's corrugated metal roof. The rock hit with a deafening clang that echoed through the silent forest. Inside, he heard Jed shout in surprise. "What was that?" Alistair pressed himself against the back wall, his rifle ready. He heard footsteps, and then the cabin door creaked open. Jed stepped out, knife still in hand, peering into the woods in the direction the sound had come from. It was the chance Alistair needed. He burst from around the corner of the cabin, rifle raised. "Drop it, Jed! It's over!" Jed spun around, his eyes wide with shock and rage. For a split second, he froze. Then, instead of dropping the knife, he lunged back towards the open cabin door, intending to get to his hostages. Alistair didn't have time to aim. He acted on pure instinct, charging forward and slamming the rifle butt into Jed's side. The man grunted in pain and stumbled, but he was strong. He swung the knife in a wild arc, forcing Alistair to jump back. The two men circled each other in the small clearing. It wasn't a clean fight. It was a desperate, ugly struggle. Alistair was smarter, more experienced, but Jed was fueled by feral rage. He lunged again. Alistair sidestepped and brought the heavy rifle barrel down hard on Jed's wrist. There was a sickening crack, and the knife fell to the dirt. Jed howled in pain and charged, tackling Alistair and sending them both to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, a tangle of limbs and grunts. Jed's hands went for Alistair's throat, his thumbs pressing down. Black spots danced in Alistair's vision. With the last of his strength, he bucked his hips and managed to get a hand free, grabbing the heavy hunting knife from the sheath on his own belt. He jabbed it upwards, not aiming to kill, but to wound. The blade sank into Jed's thigh. The man screamed and his grip loosened. Alistair shoved him off, scrambled to his feet, and kicked the knife away from Jed's reach. He stood over him, gasping for air, the rifle aimed squarely at his chest. Don't move, he panted. He used Jed's own rope from the woodshed to tie him securely to a tree. Only then did he rush inside the cabin. Cora! The relief on his daughter's face was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He quickly cut her and Dean free. They were bruised and terrified, but they were alive. They clung to him, sobbing. He just came out of the woods, Cora cried. He had a gun. He said we were on his property and we had to pay the price. Dean, his voice trembling, explained the rest. He walked us for miles. When we got to the river, he made Cora take off her dress. He said he was going to make it look like we drowned, so no one would come looking for us up here. He said the river would claim us, and the land would keep us. After making sure they were okay, Alistair hiked the 2 miles back toward the main park until his phone got a single bar of service. He called 911. He was no longer sheriff, but he gave the dispatcher his name and badge number out of habit. This is former Sheriff Alistair Reed, he said, his voice steady. I have a kidnapping suspect in custody at a cabin on the North Ridge, and I have found the 2 missing persons, Cora and Dean Reed. They're alive. The epilogue was quiet. A week later, Alistair sat on his daughter's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. The news crews had left, the official reports had been filed, and Jedediah Croft was in a cell, awaiting trial. The physical bruises were fading, but the trauma remained. Cora was quieter now, and Dean rarely left her side, but they were safe. They were home. Cora reached over and put her hand on his. You saved us, Dad. Alistair looked at her, at the daughter he had almost lost, and felt a sense of peace settle over him for the first time in a long, long time. He had retired from the law, but he had never stopped being a protector. He had never stopped being a father. And in the end, that was the only title that had ever truly mattered. What do you think drives a person to become so territorial that they would harm others over a piece of land? Is it a desire for isolation, or something deeper and more dangerous? Let us know your thoughts. And if these kinds of stories that uncover the truth are what you look for, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next.